Hey there, everybody. It's Jesse Weber, and welcome back to Law and Crime Now. We have a full show for you. We're going to talk about the updates in the Ahmaud Arbery shooting out of Georgia, the latest in the Nouman Raja trial, which is something we covered here on the network. But first, Tiger King has arrived in Washington, D.C. Well, not exactly. So anybody that followed the Netflix show knows that the star, Joseph Maldonado Passage, Joe Exotic, he's in prison, 22-year prison term for being convicted of animal abuse charges, a murder for hire plot, basically hiring a hitman to kill his rival Carole Baskin. And we all know that he's been trying to seek a presidential pardon. But now he apparently has a whole team behind him. That's right, a team of attorneys and supporters who are led by this private investigator named Eric Love. They've hopped a bus with musicians and entertainment and have headed down to Washington, D.C. to ask President Trump directly for a pardon. That's the latest. That's the latest. Now, they did put out a promo video a few days ago. If you haven't seen it, let's start right there.
I'm Eric Love, a former law enforcement officer turned businessman and private investigator. We built an army of attorneys to assist in the appeals process and right this monumental injustice.
With this extensive support, this unit intends to prove that the Tiger King is not only not guilty, rather, he is the victim.
First, let me just say, I love that in so many different ways, and I know my next guests love it as well. Law and Crime legal analyst Gene Rossi is with me, as well as executive trial producer Kathy Russin. Guys, great to have you. Now, Gene, as the latest is, if you look on their Instagram, they are in Washington, D.C. They actually arrived. They looked past the Trump Hotel. Not sure what their game plan is, but Gene, do they have a shot here? Do they have a shot at getting President Trump's attention at a possible pardon here?
Well, they definitely have a shot at getting his attention because President Trump mentioned it in a press conference or in a statement to somebody else. Does he have, I always want to say erotic, but it's exotic. Does he have a shot at a pardon? Yes. But he has a better shot at a commutation, maybe shortening the sentence to 5 to 10 years. That's possible.
Well, what is the standard, Gene, in order to get a pardon here? And is it tougher to justify a pardon for murder for hire as if it was just animal abuse charges? You know, I know that pardons can be, run the gamut, but isn't it kind of hard in this kind of case? I mean, you tell me.
Well, pardons and commutations usually occur in instances where you have nonviolent crime, like a fraud case, or like Scooter Libby got a commutation by second President Bush. But it's very hard to get a pardon or a commutation when you've tried to kill somebody. And number two, you've been alleged to have killed animals. I think that's a rough, tough row to hoe.
Yeah, that doesn't roll off the tongue very nicely. Kathy, you're going to be here today asking our viewer questions because our viewers, they can't get enough of Tiger King. What are some viewer questions? We got one lined up.
Hey, Gene, if this is successful and he gets pardoned, what can prosecutors do? Is there anything else they can charge him with?
If he gets pardoned on these charges, the state could try to charge him because President Trump does not have the power to pardon or commute a sentence that could be prosecuted at the state level. So the state prosecutors in Oklahoma or Florida could try to prosecute him on state murder for hire charges.
Gene, let me ask you something. If, we're talking about the president here, I know you said he did say in a press conference, it's something I'll look at, but it could have been just a throwaway question. Do you think that he's actually considering this? And we know that Joe Exotic apparently contributed about $1,000 to his 2016 presidential campaign. Is this something that he might be interested, maybe diverting attention to other news and focusing on this? Does he have any benefit to look into this?
Jesse, if it were any other president, I would say your logic is very sound. But with President Trump, you never can predict what he's going to do. He may just pardon him or commute his sentence just to stir the pot and create a shiny object. You can't predict what he's going to do. And we all know that regardless of what Bill Barr may say in terms of his recommendation, Trump will overrule him.
Well, let me tell you this. You know, there's one thing everybody in the public can believe, that Joe Exotic is innocent, but we didn't sit on that trial. Having said that, we had an opportunity here on Law and Crime Now to interview Kristen, who was one of the jurors on Joe Exotic's trial, and she basically said that our understanding of what happened was a lot different than what she saw. Take a look.
Well, I think people need to remember that it was more like a docudrama than a documentary. They didn't give all of the evidence at all. The jury wouldn't have convicted him based on what the average viewer saw. So it's easy to feel sorry for him, but they didn't get to see what we saw. They didn't get to hear the recordings and just all of the videos that they showed of his hatred for her, and I think that if they had seen more, they could understand more.
Okay, so Gene, we put the pardon aside. We also know that this team, assembled by Eric Love, or at least organized by Eric Love, are also fighting for his appeal. The chances that he could get a successful appeal and possibly a new trial here based upon what you've seen?
I think the chances are zero that he's going to win on appeal. From my understanding, the federal prosecutors who presented this case are top-notch. They were very thorough. I don't get the sense that the judge made any outrageous rulings. And I got to say this about the evidence. That juror clip was excellent. They had a recorded call or encounter between Mr. Exotic and an undercover FBI agent in which the defendant's trying to get Carole killed. They also had a recorded call of the defendant in jail awaiting trial, trying to sell cubs and violating the law. This guy was out of control.
Yeah, it was. I mean, look, the documentary, which was fascinating to watch, maybe flavored people's opinions about what happened. And I guess that kind of leads into the whole Carole Baskin saga. I mean, Kathy, do we have a question lined up for Gene that kind of maybe is about Carole or, you know, her role in all this?
Okay, so, you know, Carole Baskin and the disappearance of her husband, Don Lewis.
Yep.
You know, this is, you know, Joe was all over that, right? And totally comes right out and says that Carole Baskin murdered her husband. If there ends up being an arrest, if Carole ends up getting arrested in connection with his disappearance or murder, will that affect anything to do with Joe?
No. And you know what it's like? It's like two individuals in a drug gang, not that they're drug dealers, but you have a drug dealer trying to kill another drug dealer. That's a crime, of course. But if the alleged victim is trying to sell drugs or commit their own crimes, you have to prosecute those. Carole Baskin should not get a pass if there is evidence that she may have taken her husband's wife. She should not get a pass. No one gets a pass on murder unless it's Sammy the Bull Gravano, who basically got 5 years for killing 19 people. That's the exception to the rule.
And also for Joe Exotic, you know, even if Carole Baskin did something illegal, it would never justify a murder for hire plot. Now, you mentioned something before about a possible defense or an appeal. Look, his team has said that Joe Exotic, he was manipulated. He was caught off guard. They're filing a lawsuit. Oh, Joe Exotic's filed this lawsuit against all the people or the organizations or parties that have wronged him, against the U.S. Federal Wildlife Service, the Department of Interior, his former business partner, Jeff Lowe, subject in the documentary. I mean, the judge recommended that this lawsuit be thrown out, said the language was off, and basically, and that there was no legal authority. He said, resubmit it as a habeas corpus proceeding, and it can't even be decided until the criminal case is ultimately concluded. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, what the judge is saying is they call it direct appeal. Once you've been convicted and you go to the circuit court, that's direct appeal. If you lose there, you can go to the Supreme Court. If you've exhausted all your direct appeals, then you file a civil lawsuit in federal court, and it would be this would be a 2255, not the old habeas for state. But here's the thing
Right,
on that one.
right.
He has to basically prove that there's selective prosecution or malicious prosecution. Those are impossible cases to prove. Impossible.
Well, there's always, I got to tell you, who knows what to expect with Joe Exotic and what the possibilities are with all this. I was shocked at what I saw in that documentary. Gene, I wish we had more time to talk about this. I should actually talk about it for an hour. We can't wait to have you back on to talk more about what happens on their trip to D.C. But when we come back, we're going to switch gears and focus on the Ahmaud Arbery shooting. Stay tuned.